First of all, thank you so much for having me. Can everyone hear me? Is my microphone working? Super. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is such a pleasure to be here. I was just saying how this is the best part of the job. And so when I got the email from my publisher that I'd been selected for the big read, it was one of those sorts of moments when you sort of pinch yourself, because it's the kind of thing that you think maybe might happen one day if you're lucky when you publish a book, but to be part of something so special and so important for the experiences of so many people, it was such a huge honour. I kind of did a little squeal when I read the email, if I'm being honest. It was really major.
Thank you. And lots of us here today have favourite parts of the novel that we like the best, but we'd like to know about your favourite part of the novel, and we know you're keen to share some of it today with us. So I'm going to hand over to you, Okechukwu, to read some of that novel for us now.
Ooh, so do I have a favourite part of the novel? Wow, gosh, that's a big question. I'm not sure I have a favourite part of the novel, but I will share, I have several favourite parts. I had a lot of fun writing this book. But what I'm going to read for you today, just quickly, is from towards the middle of the novel. And for those of you who haven't read the novel, Nnenna is about 17. She's about to turn 17 in this book. And she lives with her single mum, Joni. And they have a relationship that's full of love and humour, but when Nnenna starts asking questions about her heritage, things kind of get a bit strained. But I wanted to read a bit from when things are going well between the two of them. So if I flick to the right bit, there's a bit when Nnenna is working in the, she has a sort of a part-time job at a fast food shop, and her mum is picking her up, and it's sort of a demonstration of the love that they have between them, and the fact that for Nnenna, Nnenna doesn't always understand her mother, but they love each other very much. So, Nnenna had her music in her ears at full volume. It was the Smiths, and she congratulated herself once again on the aptness of the music. She had appropriated the Meat is Murder album as the soundtrack to her life. This charming man was catchier, but her mother said she liked it. And she told herself, although not in so many words, that it was made for her. She listened to it on repeat. Sometimes when she was walking alone, she pretended she was in a gritty, low-budget movie about her life, and that the music was underscoring her every move, while an invisible audience watched, awestruck by her beauty and sheer significance. Although these things were worn so lightly, so carelessly, that you probably wouldn't notice, unless somebody had made a film about her and underscored it with the Smiths. Joni quickly wound up the window and commanded her face to betray no reaction to the smell. Nnenna had worked at the takeaway part-time for most of the summer, and Joni was starting to get good at pretending. She held her facial expression fast and tried to busy herself with minutiae about the car to give the impression that she had other things on her mind. Before, air fresheners used to hang in thick, accusatory bunches on the rearview mirror, while Joni made tiny, explosive comments about the smell and suggested that Nnenna's personal hygiene might be partly to blame. Joni tried to ignore it now, even as autumn was rolling in, even when, as now, it was very cold. She wound down her windows as far as they would go, which varied according to the car's mood, until she saw Nnenna coming out of the building. She wound up the windows when Nnenna arrived, because not to do so would hurt Nnenna's feelings, but she convinced herself that the smell wasn't as bad if she'd given the car a good airing first. For her part, Nnenna only plonked herself down on the back seat of the car and said thanks, with her earphones still in. For picking her up, Joni was never, ever late, and for not wanting to hurt her feelings, which were always out in the open. Nnenna knew why the car was cold. Love can be such a tiny thing. Neither of them even noticed it as they sat silently in the car, smelling of unholy meats and vowing to have a wash, a really good scrub at home. And I'll leave it there for now.
So we have used your novel in many ways to help our students settle in and to give them something in common with each other and the wider university community. And we asked our students to be involved today, and they haven't let us down, as you can see in front of you. I know they have lots of questions they want to ask you, so I'm going to hand over to our panel chair, Jade Ball, who is a second-year creative writing student here at the university. Over to you, Jade.
Hello everyone, my name's Jade, as you just heard, and I have a couple of questions for you. So firstly, what is the significance of the location? The book starts at Cambridge University, which is very stereotypically an undiverse place, but then moves into the future into Manchester.
Yeah, what a great question. I could write an essay on this. So both of these locations, Cambridge and Manchester, are places that I know quite well. I live in Manchester now. I was born there. I was raised there. Cambridge is where I went to university. And one thing I noticed at Cambridge was that it's a much less diverse place, as you mentioned. I was on the student council, and I was the ethnic minorities rep, and I had to one of my jobs was to run a party, some sort of party that helped educate people about the community that we had and that we lived in at the university, at the college. And I chose Diwali, and it struck me how few people had even heard of it. For me, I remember learning about it in school because I went to I went to just very diverse schools, and it was just part of my experience being in Manchester. It was just normal. And I guess being there made me realise that that's not normal for everybody. I was really lucky. You know, I had all sorts of exposure to lots of different experiences and backgrounds. And I guess when I was writing this novel, I wanted to write about these places in a way that felt affectionate, but also really honest. So I love Manchester, I love its diversity, but also diversity and equality are not the same thing. And one of the things that I wanted to put into the novel was that it's not some sort of paradise where everything is fair all the time and everything works out okay. And similarly with Cambridge, you know, it's this beautiful city. I didn't want to be completely horrible about it because I had lots of wonderful experiences while I was there. And even though it doesn't have the same diversity as Manchester, there's a lot about it that I still really, really love.
Thank you for that answer. Secondly, what does how you've written relate to your own beliefs or experiences? Is there a direct link, or is it something that you've written kind of outside of yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. I need to stop saying that because they're all really good questions. I think the honest answer, because somebody else asked me this earlier today, one of the other students asked, you know, how much of yourself is in this? And I think the honest answer is a lot of myself is in this and also not very much. So every character in this novel has experiences that I've tried really hard to empathise with if I haven't been through them myself. You know, I don't have a child the way Joni does, but I was raised by a single mum, so I understand a little bit about what that's like and the way that sort of affects day-to-day life and sort of the practicalities of that. Jonathan's experiences with mental health are not my own. I'm very grateful for the fact that I haven't suffered the things that he suffered, but I can empathise with them. And I think that a lot of people, whatever age you are, know what it's like to be lonely and to feel kind of isolated and cut off. And I wanted to write something that felt fair and accurate. So sometimes I'd had to do a bit of research. I read quite a bit around, you know, black women's experiences and mothers' experiences as well, especially single mothers' experiences, aside from what I knew from my own family. But for me, the main thing about this novel was that it was an exercise in empathy. I really wanted to show that people from lots of different backgrounds and experiences can be connected and are connected, and that that's a really important part of life.
Thank you so much for answering my questions. Next we have Kieran, who is a first-year English literature and creative writing student.
I wanted to ask you about you being both a writer and a lecturer. What would be some advice that you would give to writing students who are starting their university experience?
I think the biggest piece of advice I would say is just write, which sounds simple, but I think a lot of the time especially when you're just starting out on a course, maybe if you're particularly young, there's this hesitancy around writing because you're worried about writing something bad. And my advice is don't worry, because you will write something bad, and that's okay. Because you just have to get past that stage. You know, one of my friends in Manchester, she's called Sarah Butler, she's a great writer, she says that she has a draft of her writing. Whatever book she's writing, she'll write, her first draft of it, nobody will see. And I think that's really great. If you just give yourself that permission to write something bad, and it's not accountable to anybody, and you're trying your best, but if it doesn't work out, it's okay. If it does, it's great. That's fine. Most people's first drafts are not great, and that's okay. You can edit it, but you have to write something first. So my advice is just write, and don't worry about it being bad. You can always improve it.
Just coming off of that, you have a very distinct writing style, and I was wondering whether that was something that you consciously developed, or was it something that just came about with you writing?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I found my style through a lot of trial and error. There was a lot of, I wrote something like, gosh, was it 7 drafts? At least 7 drafts of The Private Joys before my editor even saw it, and then I did another 1 or 2. And that's part of the writing process. You redraft, and that's just how it works. But for me, certainly, it was realizing the way that I wanted to use humor in particular. I was really just sort of finding, as I went along, my own sort of voice. And with every draft I wrote, I thought, oh, okay, I want to try this. And, oh, okay, maybe that didn't work quite the way I wanted to, so let's try it a different way. And, I shudder to think how many words I wrote that were never printed and never published. But then again, I think that's part of the process, and I'm really glad that I went through that because I'm happy with what it came out as.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Katie, who is a third-year English language and creative writing student.
Hi.
Hi.
How does your own sort of religious beliefs, how have they shaped certain characters, like Jonathan, like Morris? How has that affected the way that you've written them?
Yeah. So I'm not going to say good question. I'm not going to say good question. The religious beliefs is a really interesting question because for me, it's maybe one of the most relevant experiences from my own life for this book. So when I was up until I was about Nnenna's age, I was raised in the Church of England, and we went to church every Sunday, and I really fully believed everything. I really believed in God. I believed in heaven and hell and redemption and sin and forgiveness and all of those things, some of which I still believe in today. And I took it very, very seriously. So it was a very, very big part of how I saw the world from a very young age. And then when I was about Nnenna's age, about 16, 17, I sort of had a crisis of faith which I never got over. So I started thinking about what I guess we call the problem of evil. How can you have a benevolent God who is all-powerful and also still have suffering in the world? And I couldn't quite get my head around that, and I never have been able to, not the kind of suffering that we see that's sort of pointless and unnecessary. And other people have found their way around that, and that's, I accept that and I respect that. But for me, it was something I couldn't quite get over. And so I think that was part of why I wrote Nnenna at the age that I did, because I think 16, 17, that's one of those ages where you probably do start asking quite big questions about the world, and you start questioning things in maybe a way that you weren't quite old enough to before. And then when it comes to Jonathan and his sort of experience, he's much older than I was at the time when I started questioning things. But I think I understood what it was like to have to reformulate your view of the world and to think, okay, this massive foundational belief system that I've had my entire life, I can't hold on to it anymore. It doesn't feel true to me anymore. And then where do you go from there? And what does that leave you with? And are you cut off? And where do you find your way? And what I guess I wanted to, without spoiling it for anybody who hasn't read it, for me, the novel is also a representation of the fact that a lot of that stayed with me. I think I took a lot of the best stuff with me, even though I no longer have that religious belief anymore. The language with which I was sort of taught to see the world, I still very much empathise with. So I mean that in a literal sense, in that, I think a lot of the time the sheer language of the Bible is absolutely beautiful. A lot of the quotations from this I took from the King James version of the Bible, which is this beautiful translation. But also I think metaphorically, there is the way that sort of my beliefs sort of taught me to see the world, which is that we are all imperfect and we have to try and get somewhere better than we start off. I really liked that, and I still like that. I like this idea of sort of striving for a better version of yourself, even if you know you'll never be perfect. And I liked the idea of forgiveness and reconciliation and redemption. These things I think are really powerful ideas for me as a writer and as a person. So they all sort of found their way into the novel somehow.
Yeah, thank you for that. My second question is about how you go about constructing some of the more intimate scenes as a writer, because you're also very humorous and non-erotic, and but in a way that is so very authentic and human. And I was just wondering about what your writing process was like for that.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe that process would be, it was a lot of fun. I'm really glad you said it was humorous, because I really enjoyed writing it.
Yeah.
As you say, so a lot of the scenes involving not even just the sex scenes between Nnenna and her boyfriend, but also, you know, the scenes where she's talking to her friends about it, or she's thinking about it, or she's worrying about it.
Yeah.
This is stuff that I think pervades experience for some people, for that, certainly for that time in your life a lot of the time. And I wanted to kind of have fun with that. A lot of the things in Nnenna's life cause her anxiety. So it might be sex, it might be her relationship with her mother, it might be the fact that she doesn't know what she's going to do for university, it might be the fact that she doesn't have a relationship with her father. There's a lot of stuff in Nnenna's life that causes her anxiety. And as a worrier myself, I know what that's like. And so I thought, wouldn't it be nice to just have a bit of a laugh about this?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice if we could just be a bit cheerful about this thing, which is actually probably quite wearying a lot of the time? So I really enjoyed writing that, and I thought when I wrote these scenes and when I thought about what life might be like for Nnenna as a teenage girl and all this pressure with all these questions around her, I thought I want to be accurate and honest about what she's going through. You know, I had friends had told me what they'd been through in similar ways, and I'd read all sorts of accounts of these sorts of things, and I thought actually what's needed here is also that sort of feeling when you're just past something so you can laugh at it, as well as the discomfort of the thing itself.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. So next up we have Yasmin, who is a first-year English literature and creative writing student.
Hi Yasmin.
So my question is about the very beginning of the book. Was there a reason that you put that biblical passage right before Joni's backstory is explained? And obviously it's about Job, so what was the significance of that particular passage? Yeah,
thank you for noticing that. So Job is, for anybody who's not familiar with, the Old Testament, Job is a book of the Bible in which very, very strange things happen. Basically, God and the devil make a bet about how miserable they can make this man's life, and then lots of miserable things happen to him, and it's partly sort of a test of Job's faith, and it's about, I guess the larger question is, what is it that allows people to be a good and faithful person? Is it just luck? Is it harder when certain things are taken away from you? And the novel is really about, in a lot of ways, periods of trials and tribulations for these characters. And I wanted to, I guess it was a sort of a nod to sort of the randomness of life and how unfair it can be. For Nnenna, there are certain things in her life that she's very fortunate to have. Her mother is, her mother is this very supportive and loving person in some ways, and sort of lets her down in others. And I guess I wanted to prepare the reader in a sense for the idea that this is a period of trial for some characters, and that in a way, it's leading them somewhere, and it might not be where you expect, but it will be somewhere different from where they start off.
Following on from that, a big theme of the book is identity. So how has writing and publishing this book changed the way you view identity, or even helped you develop your views on your own identity?
Yeah, you're right, it is absolutely a big part of this book, and I think identity is a really complicated thing, because I think of identity as something which is partly something that you have to discover and find out about. So Nnenna doesn't feel complete until she knows who her father is and what her father's culture is like, and learns to speak a bit of the language. That's really important for her. But identity is also something that you have to tell people and decide for yourself. It's not just something that somebody can just tell you who you are completely, and you also kind of can't completely decide it for yourself. It's made of partly, factors that you didn't decide, like maybe who raised you and where you were born and all sorts of things like that. So that was something that was really on my mind when I was writing this. And in a way, that was really helpful for me as well. It really clarified for me that experience, because even though my experience is not Nnenna's, both of my parents are Nigerian, and we had both Igbo spoken in the house, so I didn't have sort of Nnenna's experience of that kind of disconnection. But I do know what it's like to be Black and British, these two things which, if you talk to some people, are mutually exclusive. And so it was really helpful for me to sort of be able to own my identity in a more confident way, because I could almost see somebody else through that journey. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions from Charlie, who is a second year creative writing student.
Hi. So I was going to ask, as writing students, we're obviously very interested in the process and craft of writing. So my first question is, when writing, did you start with characters and then use them to explore the story, or did you start with stories and then have the characters follow?
Really, stop asking. So these are great questions. I actually start with dynamics rather than anything else. So before I knew that I wanted to write about somebody who had a classics degree or somebody who was a 17-year-old half Nigerian, I thought, I want to write about a single parent family, and I want to write about that dynamic. I like writing about relationships. The same is true with my second novel, and even of my third that I'm writing now, is that I think of the relationship first, because that's what really interests me. It's how people relate to each other and figure each other out and love each other and let each other down. These things to me are absolutely fascinating and absolutely at the core of the narrative. So I knew that I wanted to write about a single parent family, partly because I'd lived it. My mum was a single mum from when I was about 14, and I saw how that affected the family and the sort of the pressures and the sort of the changes that you experience. And also at the time, this is going back sort of 20 years now, but hopefully things are better. But I remember at the time there being a huge stigma around single mothers in a way that single fathers probably didn't experience, and this stigma around families with single mothers, and I thought that was so unfair. I remember even politicians sort of talking about and blaming single mothers for that sort of family structure, and I just thought that was really deeply unfair, and I thought that was something that needed to be addressed. And so when I wrote this novel, I wasn't trying to sort of say everything's perfect and easy all the time, because it's not. And, there's difficult times, and Nnenna in certain ways has to grow up quite quickly. She, I went to university with some people who'd never done their own washing before, and I thought, but if you come from a single parent family and your mum works and has maybe more than one kid, you can't let somebody else do all that stuff for you, once you're old enough to do it yourself. And so I wanted to write a realistic, but again, quite affectionate portrait of what that's like. And that's what really interests me. I love these kind of dynamics between people. And so once I knew that, I thought, right, I'm going to figure out how these characters are going to relate to each other based on their motivations and their experiences and their histories. And that was how I wrote it. And that's how I came to those characters.
Thank you so much. So my second question is, when writing, and you first begun writing this novel, who did you want to target?
I kind of thought everybody. So when I wrote it, obviously, there were certain things in the novel which I think, I thought actually might appeal to some people more than others. I thought obviously it's about somebody who's half Nigerian, so I thought maybe if you have one immigrant parent or two, you might relate to it more, or people who, like Jonathan, have had sort of crisis of faith, or maybe some mental health problems, or like Joni, people who've maybe had sort of that misfortune in their romantic lives, or maybe been a single parent. But what I wanted really was to reflect the world that I'd known. I spoke earlier about the fact that I grew up in this very diverse place, and that I just thought that was normal. And as I grew up and realised that that was not normal, it was in fact a kind of gift, I thought maybe I can sort of demonstrate how wonderful that gift really is. And I wanted to sort of give that to people. And I wanted to sort of write a novel that anybody, from whatever your experience, you could maybe see a little bit of yourself in. And what's been really interesting is that a lot of people have really empathized a lot with Jonathan, who is, you know, in some ways, kind of the most niche character, because, you know, he's not, you know, he's black when obviously most people in this country aren't, and he's got mental health experiences which are quite extreme and most people haven't experienced. And what was interesting was that a lot of people identify with him. So I have been really kind of surprised, very pleasantly surprised with that. And I think that again goes back to empathy and the fact that the joy of reading is not necessarily just about reading about people who look like you and think like you, although that can be one of the great things about it. It's also realizing that sometimes people whose lives are completely different from yours can connect to you in a really meaningful way. That's been one of the great pleasures of having published this for me. Thank you.
So you briefly mentioned there about what you've been working on recently. So I feel like we need to ask about what you've been up to since this book came out, considering it came out 2 years ago now.
Yeah, so I've been very, very busy, and I have written another novel. It's called Here Again Now, which I have for you here. So this is a proof copy, it's an advanced copy, because the actual hardbacks they've literally just been printed, and they arrived at my publisher's office, I think yesterday, and they're on their way to me in my house as we speak. So this is really exciting, and this is out in exactly 4 weeks on the 10th of March. And Here Again Now is a very different novel from my first in a way, in that it's a lot more somber. The first novel has some dark themes in it. You know, we touched on mental health and losing religious faith. But this one is much more somber in mood. You know, the humour is mostly, there's a lot less humour in this. It's much more explorative and sort of psychological. And this is a novel about 3 black British men who, 2 of them have been really close friends for 20 years, and they've always had a kind of a will they, won't they relationship, off and on, never quite making it work, even though it seems like they should. And then the third character is the father of one of them, who is in his early 60s, and he's got a lot of regrets about life. He's let his wife down before she died. He's let his son down. He's an alcoholic, and he feels really guilty about that and the way that affects his relationship with his child. And it is the story of what happens when there's a tragic event that rips one of the characters out of the story and leaves the father and the friend to find their way to each other and to come to terms with their grief and their regrets about life. And I'm really proud of it. I'm really excited, and I'm so grateful that I get to sort of go on this publishing journey again a second time. And yeah, shall I read a bit for you?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to read just from the start of this. And yeah. Ekene always heard the music first. Echike gave him something different every time. Some days, Ekene would open the front door, and there would be Samuel Coleridge Taylor before him in Echike's hands. There might be Elgar or Chopin, things Echike had taught himself, heard somewhere, and reined into his own keen fingers. Reined into himself, and then played out, wild again, like the first time it was ever played. Or he might come home early from filming, and Ekene would walk across the courtyard to an improvisation of something by Frank Ocean, something Echike had listened to on the way home, something that made Ekene think of fresh air and cool evenings after long, hot days. Something of this was for Echike himself. He worked too hard these days, and he loved to leave hard work and bother behind. He loved to step off the tube and go, step by step, to his home and close the front door and hear the busy world continue just outside. He loved this feeling of safety, and so some of the pleasure in his music was for him. But what he did was not for him alone. His music was like offering joy. All his training and listening and the hours of practice were like joy, plated up and pushed across a table to a smile. Echike loved to play and think how his playing could be heard in the street. He didn't care if the neighbours had questions or might complain in the morning. They might, and often did. That was for them. But Achike, he might make Ekene happy with a song. He might take that music that had been two pieces and make them one. He might loop them together and play them out to please Ekene. Two favourite things of his, noticed and known and offered. Or he might fly into Heathrow a week late, cursing the director all the way home, and let himself into the flat at 1 a.m, tiptoeing into his bedroom, so that Ekene woke to the sound of him humming a new piece of his own making, woke to the sound of some creation pouring into his ear, as though Achike were feeding him a dream. And how he fed him. Ekene often dreamed about Achike when he was gone. He was gone too much. Ekene always thought to be happy for his friend in his success, and to think of him doing great things, but sometimes it was hard. When it was hard for him, he thought about the way good light might hit Achike's face in some perfect scene, or how Achike might inspire someone to write some new thing charged with beauty, or perhaps only to change a scene, knowing it could be better with Achike in it. Sometimes it was enough just to think of Achike, to think of him, smiling in good light. Ekene was rewarded for his faith. He would wait for Achike as long as he could, but the trains were late, and filming ran on, and he sometimes fell asleep before Achike arrived at the big flat with its large windows for the fresh, cold light of the day. Ekene slept and dreamed of his great friend in the world, and of his friend coming near while the world kept its distance just outside. And sometimes, after dreaming, he woke to find Achike next to him in bed, barely awake, still singing under his breath. Had he sung all night in readiness? And I'll leave it there.
Thank you for sharing. That was beautifully read.
Thank you.
We have some time for people in the audience to ask questions if they would like to. If you want to ask about this book or the first novel, and if you want to introduce yourself when you ask a question so that we know who's speaking, that would be really helpful. Anyone want to ask a question?
Have a mic.
Sorry, could you just repeat that question for me?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, lovely.
What did you find was the biggest barrier when you were writing from a female perspective?
I think for me, it was just kind of the empathy thing again. So obviously, well, not obviously, I'm not female. I don't identify as female, and so the character, and I never have, and the characters who I wrote both are. And so I think that what I was trying to do with that was, again, write something that felt authentic. And I had to get to the point where I realized that what I wasn't trying to do was to write, this is what a female experience is like. I think that's maybe one of the hardest things about writing outside of your own experience, is that you sort of feel as though the litmus test for a good piece of writing that's outside of your own experience is for somebody to be able to take it and say, this is what it's like to be a woman, or this is what it's like to be a black man, or whatever it might be. And I don't think that's true. I think I think for me, the hardest part of it was sort of getting my head around that and realizing that actually, for me, certainly the litmus test is that not that this is what always happens, but this is what could happen. This is what can happen under very specific circumstances. And that for me, was enough. And I hope that that is enough for my readers.
Does anybody else have any more questions they want to ask? You know.
Thank you. Amanda Henshaw, I'm a senior lecturer in education. I was just interested in the editing process that you talked about. Is there a point, how do you know when enough is enough? I know, because I've been like that with things that I've written, and you tinker and you play, and you could go on doing it forever. So how do you know when it's enough?
Yeah, that's a... I think I've just my reflex now. That I think for me, it's probably different for everybody. I think it's probably one of those things where when you know, you know. So, in fact, it was different between the first book and the second book. With the first book, I realised it was ready when my editor had come back with some notes after I sent her the draft, the first one she'd seen. And one of the notes was, I think the ending is missing something. And she's a really good editor. She doesn't sort of prescribe or tell you what she wants you to do. She sort of says, she'll say when she thinks something's missing or when she thinks that a change needs to be made, but she won't tell you what. She'll sort of let you have that discussion with her and figure it out. And we sort of came to a discussion, and I was like, yeah, I think you're right. I think the ending is missing something. And it was really wonderful because just a few days before, I'd thought, this is what the ending needs. And for me, it was a sort of light bulb moment where I thought that I realized what's missing and I came up with a solution for it. And I think maybe because it was the ending or because I'd kind of anticipated something that my editor was going to say and that we both felt that resolved things, for me, that made it feel really satisfying and that made me feel ready for people to see it. But having said that, I think nothing can prepare, and this is probably hopefully helpful advice for every sort of creative writing student, is that nothing can prepare you for the fact that strangers will read your work besides the fact of strangers reading your work. There is nothing that can sort of prepare you for that or sort of ready you for it. You just have to go through it. And that was something that, yeah, I'm okay with it now. I've got there.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have a different question for you. I can say that this book has a lot of positive reviews, praises and all of that. But how do you take negative reviews? How do you handle it, and how does it make you feel?
Yeah, so you're right. I've been fortunate in that I won't say fortunate, I've had mostly very positive and lovely reviews. And but when I have had a review where I thought, it wasn't, I haven't had any horrible reviews, but when I've had a review where I thought you just haven't understood that, or I thought that was a bit unfair, there's no sort of easy way to resolve that because, I'm not going to tweet this person and say, you were wrong and how dare you say that thing about my book, which is actually perfect and you just don't understand. You just can't say that and you sort of have to come to a resolution in your own mind and think, okay, well, the key thing I think I had to understand was that, again, the litmus test for success is not everybody liking it universally. And if one person doesn't like it, whoever that person is, it doesn't invalidate whatever it is that you've done, whether that's writing a novel or a book of poems or whatever else it is you're doing. One person's negative response doesn't invalidate the work. But also, a really important thing is to recognize that it is work. The book isn't me. These characters aren't me. The prose isn't me. They are things that I have created, and I've worked very hard on them, and they might come from a very personal place because it's a creation of my own mind, but again, they're not me. So if somebody says they don't like the book, they're not saying they don't like me. They're saying that they didn't gel with my work, and that's okay. It has to be okay for that to happen. I think it's really important for creators to separate themselves from the things that we produce. Otherwise, you do get into this really very difficult emotional space where you can be invalidated by somebody just not loving your work, which is a horrible place to be.
Anyone else?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lucy. I work in the student experience team. I've been that annoying person who's been tweeting you a lot and tagging you and things. So yeah, thank you for liking and retweeting them. I just wanted to ask, so if your novels were made into films or TV shows, who would you have to play the characters?
Ooh. Yeah. That's tricky, because I haven't massively thought about it before. That's a really difficult question. And because I think it's one of those questions where I'd really need to think about it quite carefully because these characters, you'd want actors who could really portray the things that I've put into these characters. And, you know, with Nnenna and her mum, you know, I'd want actors who understood how to portray, like, the different sides of them. It was really important for me that there's no kind of goodie or baddie in that relationship, that they both make mistakes and they both actually really love each other. And I'd want actors who could really portray that. And I actually don't know. I would hopefully, gosh, if that ever did happen, I'd hope to be involved in the process. But I'd have to really think about it. And I'm not sure why I haven't thought about it, because I would love for these novels to be adapted for TV or film. But yeah, I think you found the one question that I can't answer. I'm really sorry. Yeah, I will tweet you. I will think about it and tweet you. Yeah.
We have time for a couple more if anyone has one.
Thank you. The Private Joys of Nnenna Maloney has clearly been a really successful first novel, a successful debut, and I read out earlier at the beginning all of the various prizes that you've won or been shortlisted for or longlisted for. So I think in the music industry, when somebody has a really successful first album, they often talk about the difficulty of the second album and the pressure that's on that particular band or artist. And I wondered whether you felt that pressure for the second novel and whether that changed your writing process at all for the novels that you've written.
Yeah, people often do talk about that, like the difficult second album or difficult second novel. Yeah, definitely. But for me, it was very different. And I think maybe it's because of a few different things. So the first novel, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I wrote something like 7 or 8 drafts of it, and it took me like 8 years to write from start to finish. There was a year when I wasn't writing because I was doing my PGC, I was training as a teacher, and I had literally no time. But apart from that, I was just, plugging away at it for 7 or 8 years. And you're right, I've had a really wonderful time with this book, and as partly because of things like this. And I think that I certainly felt, I can't say I didn't feel any pressure, but I think partly because I'm lucky with my publisher and they're very understanding and very human, partly because I had a 2-book deal, so I knew that I couldn't guarantee that whatever I wrote, someone was going to publish it, because I knew that there were expectations there. But I think because I guess I just saw it differently. I didn't think of it really as pressure so much as an opportunity. I thought, okay, I've written this book, and I kind of have a voice now, and what do I want to do with that? And that was what was in my head the whole time. I was thinking, what do I want to do with what I have? And that's how the second novel came about. And I think because I thought of it that way, it made it a lot easier. I wasn't worrying about, you know, failing. I was really thinking, how can I get better? I knew that between the 2 books, I'd read a lot and I'd learned a lot, just because that's how it happens. Writing is one of those things where you learn a lot as you're going along. And by the time I was writing the second book, I had a lot of ideas of things that I wanted to do and different things that I wanted to try. Like I said, it's a very different novel in terms of its mood. But I also was thinking, I still want it to feel like me. And there's certain things that I'm really interested in that kind of cross between the 2 novels. So family is a big theme. Religion is an important theme. In fact, the second novel is inspired by the Book of Ruth from the Old Testament, if anybody knows it. So I guess I had a really good time with this second novel, actually, which is probably not a common thing, but I wrote it in something like 2.5 years, which is, when I think about it, really, really quickly. But I'm very, very proud of it. I think I'm really proud of this novel, and I think I'm very lucky to have had a very positive experience so far of writing a second novel. Who knows? It's not out yet. Everyone might hate it. But I think I've been really lucky.
And just as a final question.
Hi, Catherine Langridge. I'm a senior lecturer in education. First of all, thank you so much. This has been absolutely brilliant and enlightening. So thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I'd like to ask you about the process that you go through when you're deciding on the names for your characters. I've been battling, I think is the best word, with a novel for a number of years. And I found naming my characters really, really difficult, because I found their identities and, you know, that a lot about the character was wrapped up in that name that I was deciding to give them. And I decided on a process of doing that. But I'd like just if you could explain how you go about doing that and the importance of the names that you choose for your characters.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I think as a professor of education, you'll understand this, is that I have taught for a number of years, and one of my nightmares is that I will accidentally name a character after a student that I've taught, and that student will read it and think, this is about me, he doesn't like me very much. And so actually what I do is I don't anymore, I think with the first novel, I sort of just thought of names that felt right for the most part. But actually what I did some of the time, what I did certainly a lot of the time with the second novel, was that I would literally go through a list of names for boys and a list of names for girls and just run my eyes down them until one of them made me stop. And I might have a short list, and I think the names in this second novel changed once or twice. But I just had this feeling, I think maybe it's a bit like naming a child. You sort of, I don't have one, so I can't say, but the way people talk about it maybe, I sort of had oh, that feels right. And then you can think about why it feels right, and you can examine that and maybe think, actually, on second thoughts, I'll go with this one. But I think, trust your instinct, I would say. And yeah, use a list if you're a teacher. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, right.
The families on the gravestones, and the family that I named was from a gravestone that I saw that was really, really old. And the children died very young, so it took me aback, and I spent a long time looking at it and thinking about it. But I don't know how well that'll serve me. So maybe a list is more effective.
I don't know. I mean, I think if the names already mean something to you, that's quite powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's a really good place to start.
Thank
I
you.
might steal that, actually. Thank you.
Yeah, Chester Cathedral as well on the floor. You know, I was looking at all the names.
Yeah.
Who's under there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who asked questions and got involved, and thank you for such honest answers. I'm just going to pass you back to Faye to just close off.
Oh, thank you very much, Jade, and what a wonderful way to spend an hour within the working day. So enjoyable. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to just close the event today. I want to say a very special and warm thank you to Okechukwu for what has been such an interesting hour of our time. And also I'd like to say thank you so much to our student panel. I'm sure you all will agree in the audience that they've done a wonderful job today. It's great to have you all here. Thank you very much. I'll also just remind everyone to please do join us for some refreshments after the event today out in the foyer. And Okachukwu's also offered to do some book signing, and you can have your photograph taken as well if you'd like to. So please do join us in the foyer afterwards. So the last thing for me to do today is to ask if you can all put your hands together for Okechukwu and our student panel.